Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona.
Hi Gail. You were looking a little queasy earlier, but you're looking better today. I think a steady consumption of sweets has done you good.
Yeah, I'm not in the best of health today, but I have discovered that if you eat a sweet every 2 minutes, you feel better. Who knew? Who knew?
Maybe this is our writing secret for the day as well. But how has your writing week been going?
So I want to talk about an interesting aspect of writing as a career, insofar as writing as a career for me. But, you know, in other careers, you reach a level, and once you've reached that level, you're there.
Yes.
Unless you really mess up, you stay on that level. You don't lose what you've achieved. So in being a lawyer, which is what I know, once you've reached associate level, you don't go back to being a candidate attorney. Suddenly, mostly once you've reached partner, you don't go back to being an associate unless you do a job change or things get complicated. But in writing, every book is a new test.
Yes.
And just because you've been published before doesn't mean you'll be published again. And just because your publisher loves you and is kind to you and asks you when your next book's due doesn't mean they're going to publish it.
Yes.
And I have really had, I want to say a week, but that would be a lie. I've had a year of things being rejected or softly rejected or suggestions being made that this book is maybe not ready. And it's kind of culminated this week in that the book that I've been writing as a joint project with other writers, our publisher does not want. They very sadly don't want it, but they don't feel there's a market for it at the moment. The market is very bad at the moment. And in a way, we're fine with the decision. We understand the decision. We know where to take the next steps if we are going to take next steps. And we did it mostly for fun. So it's okay. But it is just a really weird, from the outside, I think I seem like a writer who has reached a certain level, who has made it to some extent. But I'm not, you know, and I've got no guarantee of publication. And those people who got used to me having a book a year will have noticed there has not been a 2025 book. And at the rate we're going, I'm not sure there's going to be a 2026 book. And it's not because I'm not writing. So difficult week, a week of thinking about the nature of writing. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've struggled with too. I've dealt with a lot of rejection. I also thought that once that door was open, it would always stay open. And I'm currently wrestling with the possibility that when you end your writing career, other careers you usually end at the top of your game and then you have to retire. And writers very often just fade quietly to black. They don't end at the very top of their game because then it wouldn't be the end because then publishers would be clamoring for the next book. Sometimes we just fade quietly away.
Well, that's depressing. Thank you for that. You were supposed to cheer me up.
I don't think this is what is happening to you, Gail. But in my mind, I've been wrestling with the possibility that that is what is coming. It's going to happen in all likelihood because I think it happens to most authors.
Although there are those who just get better and better and better and more prolific, bizarrely, as they get older. I suppose there are less calls on their time for other things. You know, I do take great hope in that I still have my great novel in me.
Yes, me too.
But that being said, yeah, I do think but in a way that is one of the lovely things about it, though, that you can do it. You can do it until the day you die.
Yes.
And yes, maybe you won't be doing your very best work and you won't be at the peak of your career, but you can work until the day you die. And I know some people think that sounds awful, but for me, that is a very comforting idea.
Yes. I want to die like P.G. Wodehouse with an unfinished manuscript on the go.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But Gail, tell me what you've been reading or watching or listening to lately.
So you know that I am a sucker for a high concept book, you know, a clever, quirky, grip you kind of concept. And I read about on one of the Facebook pages a book called Who Wants to Live Forever by Hannah Thomas Uose, U-O-S-E. And it is about a drug that enables you not to live forever, but enables you to greatly extend your lifespan. Fiona, we know we are obsessed with this idea. And yet we didn't have this clever novel idea. And it freezes you where you are. It basically stops the aging process.
Right.
They're not sure how long you're going to live. They think about an extra 170 years.
Wow. Okay.
And in good health. And do you take it? And what is the effect on your relationship if one of you takes it and one of you doesn't?
Yes.
And it's really very clever and very quirky. And then just for me at the very end let me down a bit. It wasn't the end I'd hoped for. It kind of felt a bit like she didn't really quite know how to bring it all together. But I just, I come out of books like that thinking, why can't I have one of those really clever ideas? What about you, Fiona? Have you been watching anything with a really clever idea behind it or reading anything?
I've been watching, so I'm going to talk about a TV series. It's on Netflix. At the time of recording this, it's a fairly new release, and it's called Too Much.
I've dipped into it, so I'm very interested to hear what you say.
Yes. So, I'm not very far along in it, but it seems to be the messiness of being in your 30s in an urban environment at the moment, when you haven't already settled down and got married and had children and so on. And it's a kind of crossover between the UK and the USA, because this is an American girl who moves to London for a job opportunity and also to just reboot her life a bit because things have got terribly messy in America. And she actually takes the messiness with her to London and leans into it even more. And it is just, I can't say that my husband is enjoying it quite as much as I am, because he's not that keen on sort of women living their lives very sloppily in their 30s. But I'm just finding it so fun and so interesting. And this idea of no clear arcs, no clear directions, just messiness, failing, picking yourself up again and forging onwards. Maybe your career and your personal life are out of step. It's so chaotic, and it just is speaking to me right now.
That's so interesting, because I've watched 2 episodes and I'm now at that point where I'm deciding, am I into this or not?
Right.
And I think I might be with your husband.
Okay. Too messy for you.
Yeah, I'm finding her messiness a bit annoying.
Okay.
Like, pull yourself together. And it's only 2 episodes in. Why is that strange dog with her in another country? Why didn't she leave it behind? I don't understand how the dog got on the plane. And I think maybe I feel so much in a different place to a person in their early 30s. And particularly, I mean, I was in a different place from her in my early 30s. Maybe I am so far away from a messy single life that I'm just not relating to her at all.
Right.
Right. I'm not a chaotic person, but you're not a chaotic person. I'm quite sure you've never set fire to yourself with a candle.
I am not, but for some reason, I just like reading about these lives that are so different to mine.
Okay.
I got married in my 20s. I started having children in my 20s and never had that chaotic 30s apart from the chaos of children. But it's so fascinating to me. These paths not taken, these lives that look so different to mine. I'm drawn to them, but I know a lot of people are repelled by that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think I'm feeling more of the repulsion, but I may go and watch another episode now that you have pushed it.
Well, someone who writes very well structured and not at all messy books is our guest today. Our guest today is Tony Park. Tony is the author of 23 novels and approximately 10 books of nonfiction. Among the novels, we have The Protector, Silent Predator, African Sky, An Empty Coast, African Dawn, Rhino War, The Delta, and many, many more. I'm not going to name them all because we only have an hour. Tony is an Australian by birth and has been dividing his time between Australia and South Africa, but now it seems as though South Africa might be winning. So we are very glad to have you here in the studio. Tony, welcome.
Fiona and Gail, thank you so much. It's my absolute pleasure to be here.
Tony, I don't know if you listen to the podcast enough to know that the way we always start is by asking you, how has your writing week been?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've just got a new book out called Die by the Sword. So I've been touring now. I'm on a 3-week tour road trip, mostly road trip around South Africa. And I tried to organise myself so that I'd get some writing finished and I might have a little bit of a break. And so I'm working on a novel for 2026. And I just got the first draft finished just before the tour began. And so what I'm trying to do now is read my printout of the first draft and do editing on the road. So I was literally in an Uber last night on the way to an event, and that was the first chance I'd had to do some editing. So fortunately the traffic was bad. So I had an hour and a half in the Joburg traffic to start on my hard copy, which is what I do. I do hard copy of the first draft and I do a hard copy edit before I then go back and start on the second draft. So I'm not writing as such, but I am trying to edit this week.
You caught me with that hard copy thing. I don't know how many people still do hard copy edits. Can you tell us a bit what that looks like?
Yeah, I worked as a journo and I worked in public relations. And one thing I found was when you're, checking stuff, even stuff like media releases and things like that, where you are your own editor, if you're working with a client, so you don't have a sub-editor or anyone with you. I worked out that you would not pick up all the mistakes required if you were just doing everything online. For whatever reason, I guess you might have come across this, but on paper, you will pick up more errors than you will online. And so that's just a habit that I've fallen into now. And I do find too with the first draft, and I've kind of recommended this to people as well, is that I don't want to do my first edit online because, I probably will work too fast. I'll see something's wrong and I'll start fixing it. And I won't be reading the entire story. So when I'm doing it on hard copy, I think twice about every time I use the pen and strike something out or make a note. And if I add something, my handwriting is actually terrible. So I actually write quite slow. So I'm thinking more about what I'm doing and getting more of an overall picture rather than sort of going down the rabbit hole and think I must change that, or maybe I should add a bit more here and add a bit more now, because I work slower and probably more methodical than working in hard copy. And I think I found in my experience sort of over the last 21 years, I get more readers these days picking up typos in finished books than I did 10 or 15 years ago. And I believe that's to do with when the publishing industry moved from working in hard copy, which was in my time. I used to get manuscripts. I've had manuscripts couriered to me in places like Botswana, and I've gone to the FedEx, to the DHL office back in the old days and got a manuscript from Pan Macmillan that had pencil written all over it. And then we get that back and the typesetters ended up putting their corrections in. Now with everything done electronically with track changes, and a track changes manuscript can look quite busy if it's a hidden edit. Stuff gets missed. And I firmly believe that as we become more digital, despite the fact we still have very good editors, we have proofreaders, we read the manuscript time and time again, more, I reckon, in my personal experience, I get more readers picking up, not a lot, but they'll pick up more mistakes than they would have, say, 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
When you are in the writing phase of a book, can you tell us in proper detail what that looks like? Because you are now a full-time writer.
Yep.
How many words a day? What time of day? Break it down for us.
Yeah, so to make a living from this, I do a book a year, a novel a year, and most years a non-fiction project. So I do 2 books a year. So I have to be disciplined. I was never a particularly self-disciplined person, but I've had to be in this job of mine. So to complete a manuscript ready to send to the publishers within, say, 6 months, I work 5 days a week. I start in the morning as long as I can. I'm not traveling somewhere or doing something else because I tend to work better in the morning. And so I write 4 pages a day rather than a word count. That would equate, if it's 4 full pages, it equates to 1,600 words. So I write 1,600 words a day. However, I tend to write chapters that for whatever reason are about 10 pages long. So every couple of days I get an easy day because that fourth page might have one line on it or something like that. So that's my process, Monday to Friday. Of course, if I'm traveling or other stuff is going on, it's not precise, but that's what I aim for. And a couple of things I've picked up in my writing process. I try and write the first page before I do any emails, check any emails. I try to make it the first thing I do. I can't always do it. I can't resist the temptation sometimes, or I know something's coming in. But if I can get that first page out of the way, the rest comes a lot easier. The longer I take to get started, the harder it is. And the other little trick I learned is that when I finish the day's work, I stop mid-paragraph, mid-sentence so that I can pick it up the next day. And if my quota happens to end at the end of a chapter, I always write the first line of the next chapter because I never want to be confronted with a blank page. So that's my process. I make it up as I go along and I never go backwards. I never review anything that I've written until I get to the end of the first draft.
And when you leave it mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, do you always remember where you were going?
Yep. For at least for the rest of that paragraph. Sometimes I'm a little bit cheeky with myself. And then ...
Tony, we're always interested in your origin story. Was little Tony a storyteller? And then where did your career go and how did it come to writing?
Yeah, little Tony's mother was a mad keen reader and still is at the age of 84 today. She's a bookstagrammer today and she reviews books. So she's on a couple of publishers' lists. She's got a bit of a follower. So she was mad keen about books and got me reading at a very early age. And, which I don't have kids. My wife and I don't have kids. But I think it's the best gift that any parent or grandparent can give to a child. And that was our life. We weren't particularly well off, but there was always books. There was always access to a public library. And I was the little kid that used to write the little fan fiction books and write little stories. And all I ever wanted to do from the time I was a little boy was to write a book. Once I started wandering around the library after school, because my mum and dad both worked, and this library was daycare, afternoon care, I would sort of walk up and down the aisles thinking, someone must write all of these books. And people always ask you, what do you want to do when you grow up? And say, what do you want to do when you grow up? I say, I want to write a book. And they go, very nice. Why don't you become a plumber, which is where I live, or why don't you become a mechanic? I've got 3 Land Rovers. I should have been a mechanic. I'm a pretty good mechanic. But yeah, no, that was me. I was the kid that wrote fan fiction. I used to read Biggles books, and which were, I'm sure he's been cancelled now, but Biggles was a sort of fighter pilot / detective, and there was this series of books that little boys like me used to read. And Captain W.E. Johns branched into the little girls fiction market, and he had an aviatrix named Gimlet, something like that. So my first fan fiction book was about a flying detective, and I sort of thought I need a name, so I have to make up a name, not Biggles and not Gimlet. So my detective's name was Giblet. and my mother's reading says, very nice, dear. That's a part of a chicken.
The insides of a chicken. I love that story. Can you tell us how your creative love affair with Southern Africa got started? Because you are an Australian by birth and upbringing. You served in the Australian Armed Forces. How did the Southern African angle arise?
Yeah, look, I won't say I would correct you because my bio is carefully worded. It says that I was born in 1964, but I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. It doesn't actually say where I was born because my deep, dark family secret is I was born in New Zealand.
Oh, dear.
Because my mum was an Australian on holiday in New Zealand and my dad worked on the ski fields in New Zealand. So we didn't live in New Zealand that long, but I was born there. But so I grew up, very Australian background, grew up in Australia in the western suburbs of Sydney. That's kind of the not so well off part. And all I knew was I wanted to write a book. I got reading a lot. I had no particular interest in Africa at all. I would watch the odd wildlife documentary on telly. There was nothing in my family background or history or socioeconomic standards that would indicate I'd ever travel pretty much anywhere, certainly not to Africa. And so I just grew up reading. Mum got me into, as I got older, the first growing up books I read were Michener books, the James A. Michener books, these sweeping sagas with lots of history. Funnily enough, I didn't read The Covenant. It's probably the only one I didn't read. But it started to broaden my horizons and make me think more about it. And so while I knew I wanted to write a book, I didn't know, I knew I wanted to write fiction, but I didn't know where I wanted to set the book. And I've often said that, there's a couple of obvious challenges for people that want to write. And time is obviously the biggest one, to carve out enough time in your daily life. But funnily enough, place evaded me for many years. So when I finished school, I went to work as a journalist on local papers. I went to university for a couple of years and dropped out because I wasn't very good at it. I was good at school, but I wasn't very good at university. And I got a job on a local newspaper as a reporter, and I enjoyed that. But I still wanted to write fiction, and I found it was hard to get enough time because I'd be typing all day and on my manual typewriter, and it was hard to go home and try and write. I thought, where will I set this book? And I had, I don't know, maybe half a dozen one-chapter false starts. And pinning it down was difficult. When I finally got serious, I was about 32. I was working in a public relations company at this time, and I was second in charge of the PR company. It was a big company. It was a good job, really, really good job. It paid well. But, I wasn't fulfilled. I still wanted to write, and I had less and less time to try and write. Sorry, it's a long answer. But I said to Nicola, I want to write a book. And she said, you don't talk about anything else. So I said, I have a plan. I'll leave work and you can support us for 6 months, and then I'll try and get another job if I fail and I'll write a book. And she said, yes. I couldn't believe it. I was sort of half joking. But so with her blessing and her support, I set off to write a book. Now I was under pressure. I have to find a place. I have to think. And I started making all these stupid first author mistakes. I thought, I'm an Australian. I want to write a novel, but I want people overseas to buy it, and I want people in England and America to read it. And what do they want to read? What do they want to read? Oh, they probably want to read a book set in the outback. I'd never been to the outback. I grew up in the suburbs, but I thought I'll write a book set in the outback, So, and I'll research it. So I spent a lot of time researching it, I went down all these rabbit holes and bought all these books about the outback. And I didn't have any formal training. I hadn't been to any writers classes or done any degrees or anything like that. So I got a couple of books about how to write a book. They said you have to have a plot. You have to plot it meticulously. You have to have profiles on all the characters. So I had 6 months. I left my job and I had 6. I thought, now what do? I've got to think up all this stuff and I have to make up this whole story, beginning and middle and the end. I'll set it somewhere I've never been. So I'll read all these books, and time was ticking away. And I embarked on this journey that was not much fun. That was really hard work. I put myself under pressure, and I was trying to manufacture this little world in a place I hadn't been and had no affinity for. And I created this thing that felt to me like I was putting together a Meccano set or a puzzle. I was never very good at those sorts of things, but it felt like I was assembling this thing piece by piece. And it wasn't enjoyable. I'd been given a chance to follow my dream, and it was just really hard. I thought, maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what following your dream is. So I'd do it. And in my 6 months, I construct this story set in the Northern Territory of Australia in the outback in the Second World War, historical fiction. And at the end of it, I printed it out to read through it. And it was, without a doubt, the worst book I had ever read in my entire life. It was so predictable. You would know exactly what was going to happen as soon as you started reading it. The characters were not even cardboard cutouts. They were not even two-dimensional. It was ridiculous because I'd done what the book said. I based them on pictures of people from magazines and, movies and things. And I went through the motions of sending it. My mum didn't even like it. In fact, I sent it to my mum and she came back pretty quickly. I said, what did you think? She goes, yes.
At least you haven't named anyone Giblet this time.
Very, very, very nice, dear. Yes, and no giblets. But it was horrible, terrible. But I went through the motions of sending it to a publisher and it got rejected. So I kind of had to go back to work. I went back to work as a freelancer, which was interesting. I changed my life a little bit. I didn't go back into the corporate world. And to get to the point, my wife, Nicola, is the planner in the relationship who would said, we're going on holiday to Europe or Asia. And this year she said, we're going on holiday to Africa. I said, okay. That was my level of involvement in the whole process. And she booked us a self-drive trip, which I learned about on the plane from Sydney to Johannesburg. So I said, am I driving for part of this? And she says, no. She says, you're driving for all of it. I said, what sort of vehicle are we getting? Like maybe like a 4-wheel drive or something? She says, a Corolla.
And because you're going to Africa.
Because we go to Africa. And I think we go to all these big scary cities and game parks with all these enormous animals. And at this point, the planner is not allowed to say, the follower is not allowed to say to the planner, are you sure you know what you're doing here? So anyway, so we get out of the airport, we drive to the Kruger Park, was the first place we went to, and that's where it all began. And I don't know what happened to me, but it happens to lots of other overseas peoples the first time they come here to Southern Africa or to anywhere in the continent. And you start seeing wildlife in its natural habitat. And I don't know whether I can't describe, well, I should be able to, but to describe what it's like as an adult to see your first elephant or your first lion. In fact, I can describe it. I've had friends come from Australia, and a good journalist friend of mine, tough, hard-bitten journo friend of mine, the first time she saw an elephant, she burst into tears. That's what it is. You know, if you haven't grown up with it, that's what it is. And we became hooked and decided to come back. And so, sort of 3 years after my failed attempt to write, we came for a long trip. Nicola took redundancy from work. We didn't plan. We had 4 months, and we bought an old Land Rover and just decided to meander around Southern Africa. I thought, I'll have another try, because we had travelled to Africa 3 times by now. We'd become well and truly hooked. And unlike my experience with the first book, I had a place now that I was fascinated by. By no means did I know it, but the more I saw, the more I wanted to learn. I thought, I'll write a book set in Africa. Why not? And we were touring around for 4 months. I thought, I'll write a book set on a tour. And, I thought one of the many things that was wrong for me about the first attempt was I thought, why do I have to write a book that I know the end of? Why do I have to have a plot? Why can't I just make it up as I go along? So I did. I made up a story set on a fictitious tour around Southern Africa, on a group tour, but we were just the two of us. And each day as we packed up and moved our campsite from one national park or one camp to another, so too did the fictitious tour. And I just wrote it. And it was fun and enjoyable. And if I didn't know what to write, I'd look out. And if a herd of elephants walked past the fence, I'd write, and then a herd of elephants walked past the fence. Turns out people like that stuff. And by the end, I had a thriller set on a tour around Southern Africa. And I'll try and finish this answer. I went back to Australia, sent it to a publisher, and they published it. So, and that book was called Far Horizon, and that was my first novel. And my publisher in Australia said, you can write the Africa books. So here I am 21 years later and 23 books later writing the Africa books.
You've said that you didn't plot it, that you just went in with the premise.
Yep.
And it ended up being a thriller.
Yep.
Now, thrillers, at some point, you've got to start plotting to get a thriller. So how does that work for you? And do you still use this process of just leaping in and going?
I do still use the same process, exactly, because I just found it's what works for me. So it's hard to describe, to sort of dissect it and pull it apart, because, sometimes you might start with a murder or something, or a crime or something that's happened, and you have to eventually work out who done it. This first, like I said before, I never go back. I never review until I get to the end. But when I say I'm at the end of the book for next year, where I'm at now is at a point I've been at several times over the last 20 years, where I am maybe 10 pages from the end, because I still don't know who done it. I have a cast of suspects, and I have kind of in various ways set them up to maybe be the baddie or the goodie, but I don't know. I still don't know. I literally don't know who done it. And what has happened to me in the past, because I'm at a deadline, I find that by doing this first edit, as I start to go through, I start to get more of an idea. And a trick that I have used a few times where I haven't exactly known how it was going to end is because I have a process, and the first person that reads the book is my wife, Nicola, who, unlike me, has a very analytical brain and is very clever, and is the sort of person you don't want to watch a movie with, because she will tell you in a movie or a series who done it straight away within the first 10 minutes, and she's always right. I sometimes get her to start reading the manuscript before I have come to my conclusion, and I'll wait for her to tell me who she thinks did it, and I will make it someone else. That tends to work. So.
I've noticed that you like a strong female protagonist. You've got the Sonia Kurtz series, you've got the Detective Sunny van Rensburg series. What attracts you to having female main characters, and what advice would you give a male author starting out wanting to write a female main character? That's
a really good question. Yeah, and it's something I've thought about over the years, and I'm not 100% sure. I was quite a fan of Ken Follett for many years. Like, still am, but his earlier books, more often than not, had a strong female character. And I was interested about that. And he actually came to speak at a library in Sydney probably after, I don't know, maybe his 6th or 7th book or something like that. And you wouldn't believe it. There was like 15 people there. Like, he was already famous. And there's Ken Follett. And I think, oh my goodness, and I was awestruck, And he was good. He was very, he was fine talking to the group. And I think probably we had more access to him than we might have been if you'd been to like a literary dinner with Ken Follett and there's 500 people there. And so I was thinking about writing. I hadn't even really got started. And I said to him, I posed that question to him. I said, you're a guy and you've more often than not got a female protagonist, strong female character. How do you do that? And he kind of put me back in my place a bit. He said to me, didn't say don't be silly, but his tone was, well, women are humans, they're the same as all of us, and that's how you should approach it if you're going to write a book. Don't think you have to write in a different way because you've got a female character. And I thought, okay, right. And I thought that was very good advice. Now, what happened was, as I started to write, I was kind of conscious, because I'm writing thrillers, and like, they're mass market fiction thrillers. They're airport novels. I don't have any problem with that because that's what I read, But I thought, you want to be different. You want to do something like, you don't want to just have a book that's the same as all time. So my first female lead that became part of a series was that Sonia Kurtz character. I was thinking, I've got to write a new book. What am I going to write about? I need a premise. And I was in a Land Rover mechanics waiting room.
Because you didn't become a mechanic?
I didn't become a mechanic, and because I own Land Rovers, to all the Toyota owners out there anyway. So I'm sitting in the mechanics, and I was talking to this elderly guy, and we were talking about what we did, and I told him what I was doing, and I was travelling around and writing books and where we'd been. He'd travel quite a lot. He said, have you ever been to the Democratic Republic of Congo? I said, no, I haven't, but I'd be interested in going there. I said, have you? He said, yeah, I've been there. I said, you go for you wouldn't go for a holiday. He said, oh, no, I work there. And I said, are you a miner? Because I'd had a couple of Australian mining guys who emailed me, and they were mining in the Congo. He said, no, I was a mercenary. So, anyway, so you don't meet many mercenaries in Australia. So I thought, I'll write a book about mercenaries. And I thought, okay, who's my lead character going to be? Well, the temptation would be to have a Bruce Willis type character. But then I was reading a book about executive outcomes, the South African mercenary outfit. And Eben Barlow, the author, had mentioned that he had had quite a few women from the old South African Defence Force who applied for jobs with executive outcomes. Bing, there's my idea for a book, Female Mercenary. And so that's how I started off with that particular character. And then I thought, okay, so how do I write that as a woman? I thought, well, maybe I don't, because I'd served with a number of women in the Defence Force. And I knew them. I mean, I hate to categorize and stereotypical, but they made wonderful soldiers and officers. I'm afraid because of the function of the times, they had to be better than the men. They had to be fitter, they had to be faster, they had to be stronger. And because they were fighting this terrible glass ceiling that was around, and prejudice, outright prejudice against them. And so that's how that character evolved. I think mechanically the way it works for me, I don't know if mechanically is the right word, but to try and get it right, is it is a fact that once I've finished a manuscript that's at a state where I can show someone, the first person that reads it is my wife, the next two people are my mother and my mother-in-law, The next person is my publisher, who's a woman. The next person is my editor, who's a woman. The next person is my Afrikaans proofreader, who's a woman. Not many men read until the sniper gets hold of it, who's my firearms expert. So, look, I get feedback, and I have had feedback over the years that this is not right. But, you know, generally, I think Ken's advice is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in this army background of yours, you know, in a country where the men our age spent all their time planning how they wouldn't go to the army. I'm interested in how you came to go to the army and how it informed the rest of your life and your writing.
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, if I wanted to be an author, but I probably wanted to be Captain W.E. Johns, the author of the Beagle series. If I could be a fighter pilot / author, that would have been my first choice. And there was the Army helicopter unit used to train on practice landings on a football field near where I was growing up in Campbelltown. So I thought, actually, I'd like to be a helicopter pilot, you know, an Army helicopter pilot. But as soon as I sort of got a little bit older and started looking into these things, I learned that to be a pilot in the Australian Defence Force, you had to be able to do maths and physics. So I was never going to be a pilot. Okay. Never at all. So, but I was quite interested in the military. I had an uncle in the military, my Uncle Tony, who I was named after. And I had thought about joining the army. I didn't really want to do it full time. So I joined the Army Reserve, the part-time army, when I was 17. And I hate to sound cliche, but it was probably the best thing I did. I was an introverted kid. I was a nerd. I was a reader. I wasn't sporty. I wasn't fit. I'm very tall, nearly 2 meters tall, and I grew up like a beanpole, like a rake. So I would, you know, I wasn't strong, but I was tall and skinny. And I wasn't a particularly practical person, like I failed woodwork and metalwork.
I mean, it doesn't seem an obvious army candidate.
No, but I liked helicopters and army things. I thought maybe I'd get to ride in a helicopter when I was 17 and run around the bush. And so I joined the Army Reserve, and it was quite an eye-opener for me because it was all the sort of experiences I hadn't had as a kid growing up. It was outdoorsy. It was in a group environment, a team environment, which I hadn't been in. And I grew up very quickly, and I learned a lot through it. It sounds cliche, but it's true. And it was in a peacetime environment as well too. And in Australia, we had conscription up until the end of the Vietnam War, and that was abolished as a result of the Vietnam War. We decided that was not cool. As continued in South Africa, we did away with compulsory military service. So it's quite rare. Like of my circle of friends, I was the only one that was in the army, apart from the friends I then made in the army. And I loved it, but I didn't love it enough to want to do it as a full-time job. That's what I learned. It was fun, and I could learn certain practical skills. As I got a little bit older and I did things like my corporal's course, junior non-commissioned, that set me up for the rest of my life. I mean, I worked in an industry in journalism PR where people had absolutely no managerial experience or training whatsoever and didn't know how to manage people, were appalling at it. I found myself, as I got older, being put into positions where I would have to supervise people and organise people and occasionally discipline people and put them back on track. And everything I learned about management had come from that junior leaders, junior non-commissioned officers, corporal's course in the army. So it did help me with a lot of stuff. And as someone who wanted to write, I thought, I'm interested in history, interested in military history. And now I've had some experience, so maybe I can work that into the books. And I never, ever thought that I would go to a war or anything like that. That was, I mean, we were in it for having fun on weekends and subsidised booze, basically. And in 2001, after the September 11 attacks, I was actually in Africa because Nicola and I had got into a habit of coming and going. My first book hadn't come out, but I was trying to get more serious about writing, and we were spending more time on holiday in southern Africa. And I actually came to South Africa after September 11, and I got an email from my boss in the army. I'd transferred to Army Public Relations by that stage. And he said, do you want to go to Afghanistan? And I actually didn't even know there were Australian soldiers in Afghanistan because I hadn't had any news post September 11. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I said to Nicola, can I go to Afghanistan? And she's like, what? Because it was all quite gentlemanly. You know, we were at that stage, we were asked if we wanted to go. And so, yeah, I got dropped into something that I never in a million years thought that I would be involved in. And in 2002, from July to December, I spent 6 months in Afghanistan as a PR officer, basically a desk job, although I got out a couple of times into the mountains. And it was just a an amazing experience. And I had written what I didn't know it was called Far Horizon, book one. I had written book one and I'd submitted it to a publisher, to Pan Macmillan. And they very kindly got back to me with an editorial report. They didn't give me a publishing deal. This was like 2 years in the making or so, and said, we quite like it. We're looking for a book set in Africa, but written in the first person. Turn it into the third person, they said, okay, and do this and do that. And if you do this and do that, we'll have another look at it. So I did. And I was so keen, to even get that far down the process. And it was unusual. So I sent it into Pan Macmillan and then got sent to Afghanistan and kind of the book took second place in my life, which got turned upside down, and went off to Afghanistan. And while I was there in 2002, I got an email from my publisher, Kate Patterson from Pan Macmillan in Australia, and the subject line said, "You will want to open this email." I opened the email and, hey, we're going to give you a publishing deal. And we had good phone access up there because I was in the headquarters. So I called her on the phone from Afghanistan.
God.
I said, "Oh, thank you so much." And she said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Afghanistan." She's like, "What?" And so I got my publishing deal and I was over the moon. But I couldn't even have a beer because we didn't have any alcohol. I couldn't celebrate. But what happened then was I started. So Far Horizon had been written and then started going through the editing process. And I got a 2-book deal. And I said, "Oh, fantastic. I've started writing another book." Because I'd started writing another book set in the Anglo-Boer War and I'd written about 10,000 words. So I emailed Kate saying, "Oh, I've started writing a book. It's set in the Anglo-Boer War." She said, "Stop. We're just about to publish another book set in the Anglo-Boer War. Write something else." And so I was in Afghanistan in a headquarters job, desk job, boring a lot of the time. I had to do night shifts where we had to man the radio all night and nothing was happening because it was a very quiet time in the war. So I started writing another book, which starts in Afghanistan on this base. And I started drawing on this experience that I was having there with everything that was going on around me. And the lead character in that book, which became my second novel called Zambezi, is an American Special Forces sergeant based in Afghanistan at the time. So the military background then comes into the books. So it's helped me, but I think, and it is good for anyone who wants to write about what you know, draw on your personal life experiences. But that other adage is also true, and that's that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I have a military background, but I've never been in combat, never been in action. So you have to be careful with this sort of stuff. I think it can give you, certainly what the army did there and elsewhere was exposed me to people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. People from different backgrounds, people from different cultures, different experiences, and gave me like a grandstand view to the huge international coalition American war machine and everything that's good and bad about that. So yeah, it's just another life experience that you can draw on. And it comes through, some of my characters have a military background, some of them have a journalistic background, some of them being PR people as well too.
I want to expand a little on the idea of military service, because in South Africa, the boys were conscripted. They were forced to go into the army, many of them reluctantly.
Yep.
And there is a whole genre of boys on the border books, which are mostly about the trauma of it and the sort of wide-eyed 18-year-old going into these terrible situations. But some of your male characters are drawn from the men who became the parabats or the reccees or then went on to become mercenaries. And in South Africa, there hasn't historically been a lot of sympathy for those characters. So for me as a writer, that would be a difficult character to make my main character. How have you dealt with it? Because I know that PTSD is also a theme in a lot of your books.
Yeah.
So how have you dealt with that potential lack of sympathy in the South African audience for these people?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's been interesting for me as an Australian living here now. And I'll sort of get to the point of your question, but an interesting observation from my point of view. As I said, very few of my wider circle of friends, very few of them served in the military in Australia because it was all voluntary. And even in amongst my army circle of friends, the guys who I was a young soldier with, I'm the only one that went overseas. I'm the only one that went to Afghanistan. So here, just about every guy of my age or a little bit younger, white guy that I met has been in the army. So instantly there's a little bit of common ground and a bit of a common bond. I think it's important that you portray military characters realistically. And many of the people that I know that served in Afghanistan and even previous conflicts like Vietnam, if they have not exhibited signs of PTSD, there's things like survivor guilt, which are very popular, very common. And I kind of had it a bit as well, because you in the military, particularly in the Australian military, which is a small military, but we like to think that we, well trained and punch above our weight. There is an ethos that your best is never good enough. Your best is what you should be doing. You should try hard. You should do more. And what that means is if you do go away and serve in a military environment, if you do your job and you do your job well, don't expect any thanks or gratitude or anything like that. It's very different to the American experience where veterans are kind of revered, and put on a pedestal. It's almost the opposite in Australia. It's like, even if this thing is the most momentous thing you've done in your life, and for me it was, in terms of my military life, and for my wife being stuck at home for 6 months with no support and just coming home to an empty flat, it was like, it's a big deal. But then it's like, well, get over it. Like it's not important. And so you start having people then later in life, you feel bad. I felt bad. I sort of gone back. I felt like I should have done another tour. I had friends that did 2 tours and 3 tours. So your best is never good enough. So that's an interesting observation that I would make. As to the characters, it's interesting because, I've had a character in the Vendetta and in Die by the Sword who is an ex-Parabat, who's kind of down on his luck and has suffered PTSD as well too. I've had people say to me that Parabats don't get PTSD. I kind of dispute that, but so I think you've got kind of the ideal, and some people will romanticize their military service and say, it was bad, but it was the best years of my life. And there's an element of that amongst guys as well too. I think as a writer, it's like writing anything. You have to do it accurately if you can, even if it's fiction. You have to do it sympathetically, and you have to cover the broad spectrum of human experience in the Defence Force. Yes, there are funny, stupid, crazy things that happen, and there are the most terrible, tragic, awful things that happen. And it's not universally popular. So I find, I met a Parabat last night. I find like a lot of people kind of like that. They might be sections of the community where they're not well regarded because of what may or may not have happened. There's also, as is the fact that most people that serve in the military, in any combat theatre, do not serve in combat. They're in roles like I was. They're in desk jobs or support jobs or driver's jobs and things like that. And a lot of them kind of idealise the people that were in the combat roles. That may be false. So I think a lot of readers don't mind that. They don't mind reading about what they perceive as a hero. But I think to say that all special forces are these people that are immune from PTSD and they're all 100% good and all should be idolised, that's just not true. But I think if you do it realistically, I think that's the experience. And the experience I had as a PR man, I was the PR man for the Australian SAS, the Special Air Service. They are not these muscle-bound Rambos of the American films like Navy SEALs and things like that. They're not. They are mature with an average age in their 30s, intelligent, grounded people. And so I think it's important to cut away the myth when it comes to writing military stuff. I don't know if that answers your question. And not to unnecessarily criticize people, but not to romanticize them either. I don't know. Does that make sense?
100%.
Making me think about things. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
We've touched on the fact that you write, you've written a number of series. There's a particular challenge which comes with writing a series, keeping that character going. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you do that and what your advice is to people wanting to do that?
Oh, sure is. It's a learning curve for me. I have readers that just love a particular character and want to keep seeing them coming back. And when I read, sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes I like to see the same character come back. And sometimes I want to have a whole completely different story, a different cast. And I find that kind of with the way I write, my leading ladies, either Sonia Kurtz or Sonny van Rensburg, they will decide whether they're coming back or not. Okay. So I'll have a book. I want to write a book, like Die by the Sword. Like it's a dual timeline book set in the Anglo-Zulu War, and it's a modern day thing. It didn't start out to be, well, it probably started out to be a dual timeline because I wanted to write a book set during the Anglo-Zulu War. But I didn't necessarily want to just write a historical novel because it's hard. It takes a lot of work and research. My books have a conservation theme, so I thought I want a more modern conservation theme in there. So I'll write a book, and all of a sudden Sonny van Rensburg is called in because there's a murder and someone needs to investigate it. Oh, it's her. Hello, bing, she's arrived, you know. So the series will not be planned. Sometimes they'll come in. I've got a Sonia Kurtz book coming out next year. Of course, the challenge is how do you keep it fresh? How do you avoid the trap to fall in, which other authors I have read have fallen into this trap where you just tell the same story over and over again. Maybe I do. I try not to. And the other thing that I find really difficult with my two protagonists is relationships, because I want them to live happily ever after, but when you come to write another book, that's not fun. You know, they're like living at home and she's married the boyfriend and they're having a kid or something. Like what, where's the tension, you know, where's the surprise? And poor Sunny's had she's kind of gone through a couple of partners who met their fates. And it's bad because readers will say, why did you kill that person off? And why can't she live happily ever after? And she's not a happy person. So I don't know. Relationships are the biggest challenge. I don't know the answer, but my biggest challenge is relationships. I think maybe relationships does stop it from being the same story repeated over and over again. Changing the story up, letting them mature as well, I think is important. I was listening to you talking to Paige about the age of characters. Where do you pitch your age of characters? So my Sonia she's almost my age and she has a bad knee now, you know, and she's on anti-inflammatories, you know. Somebody had a bad back like me. I can't remember one of my characters had a bad back. So yeah, to age them realistically and to have their relationships interesting, to meet readers' expectations for a happy ending, to meet readers' expectations for a little bit of romantic tension. This is hard. Series are hard. And, I actually tell people who are starting out, they say, I've written my first novel and it's the first part in a 3-part series. I'm saying you might want to rethink that. Because my publisher gave me some very good advice. When Kate gave me my first deal, she said, no, you haven't written a series, have you? I said, no. She said, good. She says, because if no one likes the first book, no one will buy the second book. Yes. She says, if they don't like the first book, they might give you one more try. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it's certainly not my default setting. And I'd say beware of the pitfalls of a series. And I like starting with a whole cast of new characters. I do. My last book, The Protector, was a completely new cast, and I really enjoyed that.
Not only do you write series, but you tend to have this kind of interconnected world where even if the book is a standalone, it somehow links into the world of the other books. And you've written so much that my mind actually boggles as to how you keep track of it all. Do you have character Bibles? Do you have spreadsheets? Or do you outsource this work and rely on someone else to keep track of, who's got the bad knee, who's got the bad back?
Or are you just very clever?
Oh, no. I'm not clever. Your questions are so incisive. My goodness, you've hit the nail right on the head. There is an interconnected world because if I need a pilot, I've got a pilot. I've got a helicopter pilot. Teeny. He's a retired GP who lives near me in the Lowveld, but I made him a helicopter pilot. So I need a helicopter pilot. I whistle him up. I've got a detective. Now she sometimes will take over the entire story, and I've got the odd mercenary here and there. So yeah, you do create this little universe and it's fun. because you have and readers respond to it and they like it. I think it could be laziness on my part. I don't have to invent. Why should I invent a new pilot, or why should I invent a new doctor when I've got one? Sonny van Rensburg's daughter's about to graduate from medical school, so I'll have a doctor soon, so, which will be fun, So it's interesting. I think the first time I observed it in action, I may have been doing it already, was in Dion Mayer's books, because I love Dion Mayer's books, and he's got his casts of detectives. And Benny and Vaughan have only recently become the stars because they were part of a team of the Serious and Violent Crimes Unit and the Hawks in Cape Town. But there's all those other detectives like Matthew Baer and people like that who pop in occasionally as well too. So I was watching that, what Dion was doing, and I thought, oh, that's cool. But then I thought, oh, I'm actually doing it myself. So it's handy. How do you keep track of them? My goodness, if we talk to my wife who has to read the first draft, she said my biggest flaw, one of my many flaws, and probably my biggest one, well, there'd be two, they were timelines and continuity. I'm hopeless at it. And still at the proofread stage, people will pick up that someone's eyes have turned from blue to brown. Like, it's terrible. And so I remember when I wrote a sequel to The Delta, I was going on book tours at that stage in Australia. And what happened in Australia as an author, it's got worse over the years, but the marketing budgets got smaller and smaller and smaller. So when it came time to go on tour to promote your books, publishers were reluctant. They were spending less and less. In fact, in Australia, you can go on tour quite easily because we have a wonderful network of public libraries and they have funds available for authors to do it. So often it's a case of just having someone who will ring various libraries around Australia and say, hey, do you want this person to come and talk? And it's very awkward to do that yourself. Yes. So I met, there was one of my friend's babysitters, was a young university student, and she was quite interested in publishing and books and stuff like that. And I said, could you help me out? Could you, if I paid you a bit of money, could you help me organize a book tour in conjunction with the publishers? And it was good. It worked for everybody. And so she would call the libraries. And I said, can you do me a favor? Because she said she wanted to read one of my books. Could you read this book, The Delta, which is the first in the Sonia Kurt series? Just make some notes for me as you go through that. Like, how old is she? And what colour are her eyes? And stuff like that. Any pertinent facts that you might need. So I got some notes and things like that too. I have to go. What I do is I don't pay researchers or anything like that, although she did help me for sure. I have to go back and check, when was her daughter born and how old is she now and things. So it's quite hard work.
I'm interested with all these books you've written. And I'm going to ask the world's worst question, but I'm going to ask it. And the way you talk about it, it sounds like ideas are not a problem for you, that they're just lining up. Those premises are just coming. Is it like that? Or do you sometimes have to sit and go, I've written 20 books. Do I have anything more to say?
One thing I say half in jest is that, well, the good thing about writing thrillers set in Southern Africa is you cannot claim writer's block. And you cannot claim you don't have an idea for a new story, because I literally will just turn on 702 and get an idea for a story. Where else do you get judges murdering people, crazy doctors that go on rampages and things like that? It's mad here. So ideas come everywhere. And even when I start to worry, I tell myself, don't worry. And then that other terrible thing happens, that I think I heard someone else talking about. It might have been Paige Nick saying that, or maybe either you, Fiona, or Gail, that you're writing something, and as you're writing something, you get the idea for the next book. And sometimes that idea, you think, that's actually better than the one I'm writing. And it's like, oh, I wish I could stop writing this one and write that one. And that's happened to me right now. Right. I just finished reading a book by Karen Horn, a non-fiction, because I'm interested in military history, and I just finished reading Karen Horn's books, The Prisoners of Jan Smuts, about Italian prisoner war in South Africa. I thought, ooh, I want to write a novel about that, and that's my premise. But I've got to finish this other series book first. And so, no, I think I'm lucky. And, I write about a common theme is the illegal trade in endangered wildlife. And I'm so sad to say that just when you think you've done it all, you haven't. Yes, I've written about rhinos and pangolins and elephants and lions and things like that. But then my wife and I bought a house on the coast south of Durban, and then you start learning about shark finning and endangered sea turtles and things, which I put in Die by the Sword. So it never ends, unfortunately, in my world that I write about, the illegal trade in endangered wildlife, which is one of the top 5 organised crimes in the world, I'm afraid to say there's no shortage. I wrote a book about cycads, for goodness sake. They are the most endangered living organisms in Africa. So, yeah, unfortunately, the ideas are sadly out there.
Let's talk about your new release, Die by the Sword. It's a very new release. It came out this week. It just hit my Kindle this morning because I'd pre-ordered it.
Thank you.
Of course.
I could have given you a freebie.
Now you tell her.
Can you tell us the premise of that novel? Because it seems to me to be a kind of quest, adventure sort of novel.
Yeah. So I am interested in the history of South Africa. I'm interested in military history. I had a couple of readers say to me over the years, why don't you write something set in the Anglo-Zulu War? And I'm interested in that, of course. And I've toured the battlefields and things. And I thought I'd like to, but I kind of put it off because I thought it's kind of been done to death as well. Wilbur Smith and various other people and movies and things like that. So I'd have to think of something different. And then I put my mind to, I was working on the previous book, The Protector, and this idea popped up, I could write something about the Anglo-Zulu War, but what? And I don't generally research before I start a book because I don't really know what I'm going to write about. But I thought if I'm going to write about the Anglo-Zulu War, maybe I just better bone up on it. And so I remembered as a kid, I was such a nerd. Not only did I read, I painted toy soldiers and I did some wargaming. And I remember reading a wargaming book that had a scenario in it about this French prince who was in the Anglo-Zulu War. And even as a kid, I thought, is that right? That can't be right. But I just did a bit of checking and it was right. So what happened was Napoleon Bonaparte's great nephew, his father, Napoleon III, who had succeeded Napoleon Bonaparte, become the president of the French Republic, later declared himself emperor, bit of a trend in that family. And he came a cropper after he lost the Franco-Prussian War and was kicked out of France, and he died and the family was exiled to England. So Napoleon Bonaparte's great nephew grew up in England, of all places, and went to the military academy and wanted to be an army officer and wanted to be famous like his great uncle, and was such a Rambo that he managed to wangle himself an attachment to Lord Chelmsford's army during the Anglo-Zulu War. And his mum, the Empress Eugenie, didn't want him to go, but they were friends with Queen Victoria. And the young prince kind of sucked up to Queen Victoria, and she let him go to South Africa to join Chelmsford's army as an observer. And he wanted to emulate his great uncle so much that he started doing crazy things. The first time he saw some Zulu warriors, he galloped after them and drew his sword and wanted to join battle with them like he was a nutcase. I shouldn't say. Yes, he was. He was a nutter. Anyway, and so Chelmsford gave him this like boring job because he was an artist. He said, you can make maps. And they sent him out with a scouting party to draw a map, and they got ambushed and he got killed. It was this international scandal, tragedy. There was court-martials and inquiries into how this could happen, where the heir to the, exiled French royal family was killed in this action. I thought I could write a novel about that. So I did. So I read a book about it. He Died with His Face to the Foe is the name of a painting and a book about Prince Louis Napoleon, the Prince Imperial of France, how he died in Zululand in 1880. The book also goes into quite some detail about a fascinating story of the Empress Eugenie's pilgrimage to South Africa a year after his death, after the war was over, to go and visit the site where he died, and a memorial that had been erected to him. That's a fascinating story of its own. So I thought, I could write a novel about that. But in my books, I like to cover things, contemporary issues as well. And so I thought I'll do a dual timeline book. I did one before called Ghosts of the Past, and I enjoyed it, and I got some good feedback from it, because it's like having best of both worlds. I like historical fiction, but it's hard. And so if you only do like half a book that's historical and you make the other half contemporary, it's fun. So I've got these two parallel investigations, murder investigations, that happen in 1880 and the present day. And I'm passionate about wildlife. I'm passionate about natural causes. I'm spending more time on the coast these days. And so I got some information. I looked for a bit of information about sea turtles, endangered sea turtles, which are very briefly endangered. There's 6.5 million of them left in the world, which sounds like a lot, but a few hundred years ago there were 90 to 100 million of them. And the biggest threat is the increasing spread and efficiency of commercial fishing. So turtles are caught as bycatch at sea and killed that way. I also like to highlight good news, positive stories. I mean, I'm an Australian that's bought 2 houses in South Africa, so I'm an optimist. I'm the definition of an optimist, and I do like happy endings. And so I went to Cozy Bay in Banganek on the Indian Ocean coast of KZN, and there is the second longest running turtle conservation and research project in the world. It's 62 years old that they've been conserving and monitoring sea turtles. And as a result of that ongoing research and conservation and engaging local communities in protecting turtles, numbers have grown from a handful in 1963 to between 800 and 900 today. So it's a nice little success story. And in my universe of characters was a marine biologist who appeared in Vendetta a couple of books ago, and he fell in love with Detective Sonny van Rensburg. So I had my cast ready-made. And it's a quick story. So I need to learn about turtles. I don't know anything about turtles. And I was at our house at Pennington on the KZN South Coast, and I was chatting about this to my friend Pam, the local real estate agent, who knows everybody. She says, I'm having a braai, and this guy Andy's coming along, a friend of her husband's, and he knows all about turtles. Come and meet him. So the fictitious Adam Kruger, who I wrote, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, is a 6'2", silver-haired surfer, ripped, six-pack, piercing blue eyes, ex-parabat. Purely fictitious. Okay. And he's studying marine biology. He lives on the coast. So we go to this braai. Into the braai, fashionably late, walks this 6'2" surfer dude with silver hair, piercing blue eyes, six-pack, who's just come from his research camp on the beach in Angola, where he's been supervising his students researching turtle. The women in the room fawn. I go, oh my goodness, this is possibly the most handsome man I've ever seen. And Andy is a real life expert on sea turtles, and he's walked into the room. So I learned everything about it. Yeah, and he, like many other things that I write about, is proof that truth is stranger than fiction in South Africa. So I learned a lot from him about sea turtles, and have put that in the book. So that is why, bizarrely, a book about the Anglo-Zulu War also features sea turtles. And at the same time, I met a woman by the name of Carmela who has a game reserve, a small reserve up near the Botswana border at Alldays, and she breeds rhinos. She has rhinos on her farm. And that got me looking and interested in things such as private ownership of rhinos. More rhinos are in private hands in South Africa, which means more rhinos in the world are in private hands than they are in national parks and reserves. And that presents certain challenges to private landowners, the biggest being the cost of keeping those rhinos secure against poachers. So Carmela spends 50,000 Rand a month on anti-poaching and does not run her farm as a commercial concern. And so there's no way she will ever recoup that expense. And since 2014, when she got 2 rhinos, they've bred, and she's exchanged rhinos with other farms to increase the gene pool and keep them safe. She now has 20. So she's gone from 2 to 20 rhinos during a period of the worst poaching that's gone on in the history of this particular country. And it's a quiet success story. And one that's come with challenges, and one that's come with sacrifice on her part. And I thought, there you have, people say, where do you get the ideas for the stories? And it was all there. How do I combine it into one book? Well, that was the job.
Tony, you've touched on that you also write nonfiction. You write biographies.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the writing is different?
Yeah, so I'm what they call a ghostwriter. I like to say co-writer, but that's the industry term. And it was just something that was offered to me by my publishers in Australia. They had someone who they'd commissioned to write a book. It's a South African guy, as it turned out, Kevin Richardson, who's a lion whisperer. He does a lot of good work with lion research these days and conservation. And Pan Macmillan just needed someone who could write his story. And my publisher said, well, do you want to try it? I said, sure. I didn't know how to write a biography. I didn't know how to be a ghostwriter, but I did. My name was on the book. Like he wasn't pretending like he didn't write his own book. We wrote it together. And I really enjoyed it, because it took me back to my time in journalism. I don't think I was a very good reporter. I was certainly not a foot in the door investigative reporter. I would never end up on a carte blanche or something like that, or 60 Minutes in Australia. It wasn't me. I didn't want to be that person, but I like writing. And one of the things I liked writing was features, interviews with interesting people. And now I'm getting paid to do an interview with an interesting person. And instead of being 1,000 words, it's 80,000 words. And so I did that book. I really enjoyed it. And then I got commissioned to do some more, and I started looking for people myself proactively, whose stories I could write. And a couple of things, it gave me something different to write about. Sure, a couple of them have been African based, but also they've books about people who've served in Afghanistan, and a guy who ran a charity rescuing children in Asia, in Cambodia and Thailand. So really different parts of the world. And I don't want to downplay it, but it was easy for me, because I had worked as a journo. I don't think having worked as a journalist, a reporter on local papers necessarily helped me to write fiction. I had to unlearn a lot of the things I'd learned and learn new skills, and like to be able to describe stuff, not just report dialogue. So I found that was a big turning point for me, because that happened about 13 years ago. And I had been hell-bent on writing a novel every year in the other 6 months of the year. So what would happen, my wife and I got into a routine where Nicola started doing contract IT work. And so we would work really hard in Australia. She is a contract IT person, and me as a freelance PR consultant for 6 months, doing everything we possibly could to make as much money as we could. And then we would come to Africa for 6 months and blow it all. And I would write another book, and then go back and do the same thing again. As soon as I started doing the non-fiction, I could supplement my fiction income. Now, I say this to a lot of authors who want to be serious about changing their life maybe and making it their job. We know how hard it is. So many writers, you have to have a day job. Now, what if your day job was writing? So what I was able to do is say that I write a novel every year because this is the only thing I've ever wanted to do since I was a little boy. It's my passion. It's my creative outlet. But if I can write a biography, that's my day job. So I write 2 books a year. So I give that advice to a lot of authors. I say, look at nonfiction. Think about it. There's always a need for ghostwriters. If you're lucky and you can do it commercially with a deal, that's good. But there's no end of people who want to tell their story or their mum's story or their dad's story or something like that, but they don't know how to do it. So yeah, it's worked really well for me. So if I do, as I do most years, is I'll do a novel and a biography. It's worked really well for me. And that's what has allowed me to make a living as a writer.
That was actually going to be my next question. How, because you have a proper career. We speak to a lot of people who fit it into their day job, or we speak to people who are full-time writers, but I don't really understand how they're putting food on the table. Yeah. And sometimes it feels a bit rude to dig too deep.
You're really an eccentric millionaire or something.
What is going on here? But you are explaining how it is one creates a career as a writer in a market where we can't all be J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, and things have changed rapidly in the publishing industry in the last few years. The rise of independent publishing, indie writing, self-publishing by a different name, but and removal of the stigma that was once attached to self-publishing or vanity publishing. So the way I make a living as a writer is to also treat it as a business and to try and learn things that I've never learned before about running a business. And so I'm traditionally published, as they call it these days. It's now traditionally by Pan Macmillan in Australia and New Zealand and South Africa. And I have had overseas publishing deals, but I learned pretty quickly that unless you're selling hundreds of thousands of books, the only benefit in saying I have a UK publishing deal or a US publishing deal is content on social media. I have a US publishing deal. Guess what? I have a UK publishing deal. Guess what? By the time those books are published in the UK and that publisher is distributing them in South Africa, I am making 6 Rand or 30p or 60 Australian cents per book. Mm-hmm. It doesn't stack up. So I have had overseas deals, but what I've been doing the last few years as part of my author business, authorpreneurs, there's even a title for us now, is looking at rearranging my business. So I've bought back rights and taken back rights. And so I self-publish in the UK, US and Europe under my own imprint. And I have a readership there. It's not as big as my South African readership or my Australian readership by any means. But for the numbers of readers I have there, I'm far better off self-publishing in ebook and print-on-demand books in the US and UK. And that's my kind of, I guess, second source of income. But I've been able to take charge of that, thanks to changes in technology. I'm able to format my own books. I do my own typesetting. I produce my own ebooks, print-on-demand books. I still have a cover designer. I'm a firm believer that you should pay for a cover designer. And I've only done one. I'm working on another one on a second purely self-published book, which has been commissioned by somebody else. So I always tell people pay for an editor, of course. So pay for a cover designer and pay for a professional editor. So so the business side of things, it takes up more of my time. But when you say I write full time, it's a job, it's a business. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, Tony, you are an incredibly prolific putter-outer of content. But I also want to ask you about the content that you absorb. What have you been reading or listening to or watching lately that's made an impression on you?
So I ran into Mike Nichol, the South African crime writer from Cape Town again at Franschhoek, and I had read some of Mike's books a few years ago, but I had sort of forgotten to read others. So I've just picked up another Mike Nichol, Sleeper, which I'm really enjoying, one of his Fish Pescado and Vicky Khan books. And I had read one or two before. I really enjoy Mike's writing, great writer. And I discovered a writer, when I say discovered, I picked him up from a blog that I followed, a British writer by the name of Mark Mills, who is that rarest of cats. He is the only other person I've found who's like him is Martin Cruz-Smith, who wrote the Detective Renko series of books starting with Gorky Park. Someone who has the skills of someone writing literary fiction to craft beautiful, multifaceted characters and write beautiful, rich description and combine them with a page-turning thriller. Mm-hmm. Martin Cruz-Smith is an expert at it. And Mark Mills from the UK is just as good. He's a brilliant writer. And so in my brief holiday that I allow myself each year, where all I do is sit by the pool and read, I read all 5 or 6 of Mark Mills's books. Interestingly enough, I can't believe it. He's been shopping around looking for a publisher for his latest book, but he hasn't got one. And so he decided to release it on Substack. So on the online, writing, which I hadn't really had an exposure to Substack. For people who may not be aware of it, it's like Facebook for people who read. It's like there's lots of literary content. So Mark released his latest book, Tigerland, which is set in sort of British colonial India in the early 20th century, one chapter at a time. Mm-hmm. And it was the most amazing experience. It took me back to my childhood when I used to subscribe to a weekly comic from the UK. It was a war comic. And where the highlight of my week was getting my updated stories of all these serialized stories each week. And so I love Mark's work. He writes thrillers all set in different countries and different periods of history, sometimes post-Second World War America, Italy in the early 1920s, France in different times. But they're whodunits. They're beautifully written. And so Tigerland's set in India. And he released it a chapter at a time, which was sweet torture. Because I just found myself hanging, waiting for the next chapter. He was actually, I stalked him a bit. I'm a fanboy. I'd emailed him. I became his friend. I wanted to be his friend. And he was nice. He let me be his friend. He read one of my books. Oh, I was so terrified. I thought that's the end of the bromance. He's going to hate it. But he was quite nice about it. So, and he was on holiday in France. And he was going to do one chapter a week. And I was emailing him. He says, I better do more often than that. I'll do one chapter a day. And I wanted to interrupt his holiday because I'd be going to bed and thinking it's time for my fix. And then, Mark, where's my chapter? Where's my chapter? So yeah, it was really interesting to read a book in a completely different way. And I was reading it on my phone, which was weird because I couldn't put it onto my Kindle. So very odd. But it's interesting, the way we consume books is changing, may change. Some people only want paper books. And to read something serialized was so retro but fun.
Well, we hope everyone rushes out and purchases your new release, Die by the Sword, published in South Africa by Pan Macmillan. And also, if there is anybody left who hasn't checked out your backlist, we hope they still do, because it rewards scrutiny. But this has really been great, Tony. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.
Gail, that was my first time having the privilege of meeting Tony Park, but you already knew him, didn't you?
Yes. I actually don't even know why. I think it's from being on panels together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in terms of what he said as an author, what did you take from that?
So I think for me, and I think it's such an important thing, and I started out this podcast talking about the negative side of writing, the rejection, and Tony reminded me he has fun. It only came right for him with writing when he started having fun with what he was writing. And I don't know if you noticed how often he used the word fun. And then he goes, and I'm interested in this, so I'll bring this into the story. I'll bring a sea turtle in because that seemed like fun. And it just was, I kept thinking, you've got to find the fun. You have to find the fun in writing. God knows we're not doing it for the money, Fiona. So if we aren't doing it for the fun, then what on earth are we doing here? So I found that quite inspirational. What about you?
So I think what I took, and it was beyond inspirational, it really has lit a fire under me. I am so in awe of how hardworking and productive he is, and how, he's a few years older than I am, but he is still looking at how to add things to his daily burden. And I'm looking at how to take things off my plate. But he's, one fiction novel a year is not enough. Let me add in a non-fiction book as well. And let me create these multiple income streams and let me see how I can leverage what I've got and turn it into more. It was just fascinating, and I feel as though I've underestimated my own capacity. I could be doing more, and now I'm inspired to think carefully about how I really could do more. Maybe add something in.
I love that, Fiona. I really love that. I think that's, could we maybe add in a new time travel series, perhaps? Just putting it out there. But I do think that is, there's something so inspirational about people who really are getting the most out of their days and the most out of their lives. And as you said, we, sometimes one sits going, how can I make it easier?
Yes.
Maybe the fun lies in making it a bit harder.
Maybe it does. And if any of our listeners have experience of this, if they have found a way to find the fun in writing, we'd love to hear about it. If you have thoughts on being more productive, perhaps you have the luxury of being a full-time writer. And in the case of Tony, I don't think it's a luxury. I think he has really created that life for himself very intentionally. But if you have any experience of that, please get in touch with us. We're on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.